This is the Messiah Hour with Ari Lewis.
Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the Messiah Hour here on IsraelSportsandNewsRadio.com. Thank you for joining us. We have a great show today. At any time, if you'd like to email us, you can do so at messiahhour@gmail.com, or you can email the station at IsraelSportsandNewsRadio@gmail.com. A lot of political turmoil on the horizon regarding Israel, and also some political news regarding the United States. On the line to discuss this, the founder of Real Clear Israel and Israel Sports News Radio's North American correspondent, Leslie Ann Stoffel. Leslie, how you doing out there?
Great, Ari. Good to talk to you.
Yes, indeed. So let's talk about first Donald Trump. He announced his candidacy for running for president a few days ago, and there was talk 4 years he might run, but it turns out that was more of a publicity stunt for his show The Apprentice. This time it looks to be legitimate. I want to know your thoughts about him potentially improving the economy in the United States, as well as his relationship with Israel.
Okay, so it's interesting that you bring this up because Sean Hannity had him on his show last night for the entire hour. Now, I didn't watch the whole thing, but I saw the beginning part, and I was really skeptical about him, but he seems to be very serious. But we'll have to wait and see what type of who he brings on as his running mate, and then we'll be able to see. But he said that I believe he'd be as good as anybody could be. He'd be better than Obama, that's for sure, for Israel, because Donald Trump is for America. He's for America. He's for Western values. He's for, capitalism. He's for creating jobs. He's for fighting. He wants to fight ISIS. He says he has a plan for that. He didn't want to give out too many details because he criticized Obama for giving every single time he's going to do something, he tips off the enemy. Like, we're going to put boots down. We're not going to put boots down. We're going to do this. We're going to go on to this town, And he said the generals of old would be spinning in their graves, and that's very true. You don't give out all your military strategies like that on TV every 2 minutes. So anyway, I thought that was quite interesting that he said that those sorts of things. He did say that Iran, under his stewardship, Iran would absolutely not get the bomb because he and Sean talked back and forth about what Iran is doing right now. I mean, they're in wars, proxy wars against Israel. They're involved in Yemen. They're involved in the within the ISIS situation there. And Donald Trump said he would definitely put down very strong sanctions, and he criticized Obama and Kerry for their the way they're negotiating that situation from a place of weakness, which is very bad, especially in the Middle East. So all in all, it's still so hard for me to even wrap my head around Donald Trump as president, but he talked a good talk. So if we can go with that for now, we could say that he would be good for Israel, and he probably would be good for America, but we'll just have to see how things, pan out.
An interesting nugget, I guess, to the story is that Donald Trump's daughter, Ivanka, converted to Judaism. And I was thinking, I don't think we've had a president with a Jewish daughter, as far as I know. Will that have a bit of a factor? That kind of makes you feel more comfortable, I guess, if he is president in his relationship to Israel, because he's not going to do anything too bad, you would figure, with a Jewish daughter.
That flashed through my mind, too, last night. I thought of that. I thought of how his daughter's doing that, and she's a very, she's such a polished and classy person on top of all that. So I thought of that, too. I thought that was quite an interesting point to it all, too.
Yeah, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. What do you think about his chances are of winning the nomination? There's obviously Jeb Bush he's a bit of the front runner. There'll be some other candidates that they'll make a push. But something, an advantage Donald Trump has is he doesn't have to go outside for financing. He can finance his own campaign, much the way Mitt Romney could, even though he got money from other people, and Ross Perot was able to do that. So talk about that aspect, how Donald Trump could finance his own campaign, and what do you think his chances are of winning the nomination?
All right, it's just so hard to say for me because I've tried to find out what other people are thinking, if they really think he's serious, because he did play the game before, and people, it kind of hurts his chances, I think, in a way, and because he comes off as so kind of arrogant, but then again, he's saying really positive things, that people want a strong leader now after Obama. So he very well could have a chance. We'll have to, again, see if he's not going to, if he, doesn't get into the nomination and goes to a third-party thing, and then they're saying that could bring Hillary Clinton in. So the whole thing it's actually going to be really interesting to watch. So we'll have to see how that goes. But, yeah, he can definitely fund his own campaign. And I'm going to be watching this really closely because I find it really interesting. He's a real, interesting person to be throwing into the mix with all of his crazy sort of background and antics. But we'll have to see what happens.
Again, you're listening to the Messiah Hour here on Israel Sports and News Radio. Our guest is Leslie Ann Stoffel. Leslie, let's talk about some of the anti-Semitism that occurred in France. Apparently, the president of France spoke out and asked Muslims to stop with anti-Semitism. So that was something positive. What do you think? Tell us about what occurred in France.
Well, yeah, there was this. I saw this on Ynet and actually on Israel National News too. The French Prime Minister calls on France's Muslims, it says, to name the enemy. And he's wanting, it says, hate speech, anti-Semitism, hiding behind anti-Zionism and hatred of Israel, hideous sermons are not Islam, says Emmanuel Valls, calling to show the world that France and Islam are fully compatible. But you see, what I think about this is just really a fantasy and a pipe dream for this guy, for this French PM, because he's calling for this, but in truth, I don't see it happening. The entire Islamic world needs to come. If this is going to happen, the entire Islamic world needs to come together and expunge these texts calling for the hating of Jews and the killing of the infidel. This has to be expunged from the text and not taught at all. Just doing this in France isn't going to help, because even if they were going to do it, because all over Europe and all over the world, the exact opposite is going on. So I just don't see this happening. I mean, it's a nice thing for him to do, but he said that to say that France and Islam are fully compatible, when in reality, that's at this point is not the case. So these fantasy little things that these, our Western leaders want to get into, these little fantasies that this jihadic Islam, excuse me, is compatible in the West, just isn't going to cut it. It's just not true. And they need to face what is really going on, or else we're not going to get anywhere with this.
Let me ask you then, in regards, part of anti-Semitism, I understand that there were some Israeli students not allowed in a certain museum. Is that correct?
Yeah, there were some Israeli students that wanted to go to the Louvre Museum in Paris, and they were not allowed in. They were actually turned away. And their, I'm just trying to find it here, their teacher, the person in charge of them, went in and tried to make the reservation. And when they found out they were from Israel, they wouldn't let them in. And then he went and made it under a different name or something, and they were able to get in. Louvre investigated for turning away Israeli students. So there was an investigation going on, and they told the teacher, his name was Steffi Hendler, that they had problems with their automated system and this and that. They made all kinds of excuses, but he found out that it wasn't true. And they were actually being discriminated against because they were Israeli. And now it's interesting. This is France, and there's another story that I don't know if I sent this one to you, but the Aliyah from France soars to 25%. So there's another Aliyah to Israel from France that soared 25% this year, from 4,000 to 5,100 people. So you can see there's a huge, huge problem in France with anti-Semitism that, really, to be truthful, it's stemming from the Islamic teaching, to the Muslims in France, and the immigration of the Muslims to France and Europe is so big, and it's becoming a really big problem for the Jews in those areas.
Again, this is the Messiah Hour here on Israel Sports and News Radio. My guest is Leslie Ann Stoffel, and we're talking about anti-Semitism in France, but I understand even in your home country of Canada, there was some recent anti-Semitism. Tell us about what happened.
Yeah, we're having the same problems here in Canada. Actually, last summer, during the war, the war in Gaza, there were some pro-Israel rallies here in Calgary and Toronto. They had them in different places too, but there were actually physical assaults that happened at these rallies, these pro-Israel, pro-Jewish, pro-Israel rallies. There were Muslims that came to these rallies and actually physically beat up the people there, and there was a Jewish family, a mom and a dad and the kids were beaten up in Calgary, and they went to court and everything, but there were no charges laid or anything with it. Ezra Levant tried to help with that and get them lawyers and get things, make sure that the perpetrators were charged and everything. And in Canada, we have such lax laws on everything. They basically got away with it. And so here's the article here is in the Jewish press, and it's called "Why is Anti-Semitism in Canada Soaring?" And it says reports of anti-Semitism in Canada skyrocketed in 2014, and it appears to be the result of the legitimization of anti-Zionism, which is a code word for anti-Semitism. And again, it's the same thing. This the demonizing of Israel, the demonizing of the Jews is becoming so mainstream, and everybody is so afraid to, and a lot of it's coming from Islam, and it's also coming from the hard left is teaming up with them, and people are so afraid to criticize because they get smeared. So it's becoming like this warping of the Western mind against the Jews. And I'm so worried about this, Ari. I'm telling you, because I watched a documentary the other night about Hitler and what happened in Germany. And there was a German guy on there who was a German youth. And he said by the time the Jews were being murdered and slaughtered and in the Holocaust, he said the actual German, just a day-to-day German person, wasn't really into doing this, but he said by that time they had been so brainwashed into believing that the Jews were just nothing and that killing them was okay, that was what was happening in the mindset of the German. And this is what is really concerning me, is because this, as I watch this going on, it's exactly the same thing. The demonizing of the Jews, the demonizing of Israel, to the point where people, if Iran gets a bomb and bombs Israel, who cares, because it's just the Jews. That's what I'm really very, very nervous about with all this. And so I'm trying to, trying to post lots of stuff on Facebook and Twitter, and I'm writing more things. I just wrote an article about it. We can get into that when you want to, but yeah, I'm really, really concerned about this. And even though we have Stephen Harper as our prime minister here, we're still having these issues. So, I don't know. It's just very, very concerning to me. So,
well, tell us about that article that you wrote. I'm sure our audience wants to hear that, needs to hear it. So tell us a bit about that, what you wrote.
Oh, okay. So I don't know if people are familiar with a young Jewish man in Paris. It was 9 years ago. He was kidnapped by an Islamic gang. Now, the reason why we're writing about it now is because, and it happened 9 years ago, is because they've just made a film about it called 24 Days, and people can see it online, video on demand, and on July 14th it'll come out on DVD, I believe. So anyway, my article is called "A Murder in Paris: 24 Days in the Life of Elon Tellini." It's on the Israeli Cool site. So anyway, Elon was targeted by this Islamic group for kidnapping and being held for ransom. Now, he was lured into this they sent him this beautiful girl as a honey trap into his phone store. His family wasn't rich, but they figured that the Jews, they said, would stick together and pay the ransom. So anyway, this young girl got his phone number. She called him on Shabbat and lured him out. He went to meet her, and when they went to go to her place, a gang jumped on him and chloroformed him, and they bound and gagged him, threw him in a car, and took him to an apartment in Paris and held him there. It was a vacant apartment, and so there were a lot of people in on this. There was the guy that was the superintendent of the apartment was giving them the apartment. They were going to pay him, and then this gang was holding him, and then some of the people around there knew what was going on, but they were beating him and starving him and putting cigarette butts out on him. And in the meantime, they contacted the family, and the family went to the police. So the police and the family were working together. But the main guy, the main kidnapper, his name was Fofa. I think, I can't remember his name actually. Hold on one second. Anyway, he went by the name of Django, and he was a black Muslim from the Ivory Coast. So he started doing the calls to the family from the Ivory Coast, and then he came to Paris, and he sent, during one of the calls, he read from the Quran, and so the family was shocked, and the mother realized right then, Elon's mother Ruth realized right then that this was an anti-Semitic kidnapping, and they were in trouble. But the police would not go along with that. And part of the problem, part of the reasoning for that was they have a very pro-Islamist, culture and government, and they had recent clashes. The Muslims had one of those riots where they were burning cars and stuff in the city, and so they weren't. The chief inspector didn't want to go there, which turned out to be so bad for Elon, because they treated it as just a regular kidnapping. So this went on and on and on. It went on for 3 weeks, and they even had this Django guy in their clutches almost. He was in a cyber cafe, and they went in blazing with the police flashing lights and everything, and he took off and ran away, and he got away. So they would not pay this ransom, and in the meantime, Elon is still being held. He's being so tortured. It was even a miracle that he lasted as long as he did. But here's something that I picked up. I was reading Phyllis Chesler's article on this too, Dr. Phyllis Chesler. And she had some really brilliant insights in her article. And there's a couple of things I just want to read from her, what she wrote. And it says, in a sense, France prepared the groundwork for such an atrocity. It persecuted Captain Alfred Dreyfus, which ironically led to the creation of the State of Israel. The very assimilated Austrian journalist Theodor Herzl covered Dreyfus' trial, understood that the Jews were endangered in Europe and urgently needed their homeland. He pioneered a vibrant Zionist movement. France is also the country that, under de Gaulle, made deals with Arab tyrants for the sake of oil. In return, France allowed the mass immigration of Muslims as cheap labor, Muslims whom they failed to screen or assimilate. Hostile neighborhoods of increasingly radicalized third and fourth generation Muslims lived in parallel worlds. And this is also the country and the culture which embraced Yasser Arafat and the PLO. France supported the Palestinian enterprise, aka the destruction of Israel, in the hope that this would appease their own Arab streak. They also put Philippe Carcenti on trial, Dreyfus style, in 2008 for having challenged the biased and viral French media coverage of the Mohammed al-Doura affair. And al-Doura was the staged fake murder of a Palestinian 12-year-old for which the Israelis were blamed and which became the justification for Arafat's long-planned Al-Aqsa Intifada. Long before the Charlie Hebdo and kosher supermarket massacres by French Muslims in 2015, France's left-wing and pro-Islamic political culture was in large part responsible for Ilan Halimi's kidnapping and non-rescue. So I'm just putting that in for a bit of backstory to understand what was going on here as Ilan was kidnapped and being held, and what was kind of the mindset and the culture behind why he wasn't rescued. So what happened after this is this Fofana, this Django, he takes Ilan, he ends up not getting the money. He takes Ilan to a wooded area. After Ilan has been shaved his head, they've poured bleach on him, which is very reminiscent of the Holocaust. Then this Django guy took him to a place in the woods near train tracks, and then he stabbed him and lit him on fire and left him there to die. But Ilan was so tenacious and courageous that he, dragged himself. He'd been starved for 2 weeks, but he dragged himself to the side of the road. Somebody found him and called the police, and then the police, and see this again, they called the police first, not the ambulance. They called the police. The police came and were holding on to him and trying to help him, and then they called the ambulance. On the way to the hospital, he died. And it said that according to the autopsy, Ilan had acid, cigarette, and gasoline burns on 80% of his body. Multiple hematomas and contusions, a 7-millimeter box cutter incision on his left cheek, 2 wounds underneath his throat, multiple broken bones, a missing ear, a big toe, and wounds to his genitalia. The coroner concludes none of his wounds had been fatal. The report reveals that a combination of inflicted torture, exhaustion, and the cold is what eventually killed him. And then I also wrote, too, that the authorities fought the entire way, but in the end had to determine that this was indeed an act of barbaric anti-Semitism. Ilan's mother and the community spoke out so loudly that they had to listen. Even the kidnappers themselves admitted that this is what it was, still getting the authorities to go against the political mainstream and admit this. That's what this was like pulling teeth. And Fofana, he escaped to the Ivory Coast, but they arrested him there and extradited him back to France. 29 suspects, and then he was put on trial. The 29 suspects were charged and 19 were convicted. Fofana gets life without possibility for parole for 22 years, and other gang members got between 5 and 18 years. And then something else Dr. Chesler had in her article, which I found interesting, was Fofana's lawyer was Isabelle, I can't say her French name. Anyway, his lawyer was married to this Jacques Verger. This Isabelle Canton-Perret was Jacques Verger's partner. Verger is the lawyer who defended Nazi Klaus Barbie. Cotante Perret was also the wife of Carlos the Jackal, a Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP terrorist, whom she married in jail in a Muslim ceremony. I thought that was absolutely shocking. I was stunned by that. But anyway, so 1 year later, Elon's mother, in a final heartbreaking decision, had his casket exhumed and reburied in Jerusalem. And she said that the people who did this to her son will be out one day and she will not have them sit on his grave. And she was right, because they created a memorial in a garden in a quiet area. And recently his memorial was vandalized, and they had to repair it, and it is now there repaired. Hopefully it won't be vandalized again. And then I just said, may we never forget Elon Tellini, and may he rest in peace. And that's the story pretty much. And you know, it's just so shocking and so sad. And I'm just so afraid that this is really, the anti-Semitism around the world is building to such an extent. It's very, very concerning and worrying for me. And I'm hoping to do more and more things to bring awareness and get people to turn away from this anti-Semitism if they even have it in their mind, you know. Yeah, so that's that story, Ari.
All right, last question I'll ask for you. I understand there was an anti-Israel rally in Canada. Is that correct?
Yes, there was an anti-Israel rally planned in Toronto, and thank goodness for this, Ontario's government has denied permission to hold a pro-Palestinian anti-Israel rally on the grounds of the provincial legislature in Toronto. So it says here that was supposed to be on July 17th and 18th. So that's very, very good news that wasn't allowed to go ahead.
All right, there you go. Again, this has been another episode of the Messiah Hour here on Israel Sports and News Radio. My guest has been Leslie Ann Stoffel of Real Clear Israel, and Israel Sports and News Radio's North America correspondent. Leslie, thank you for the time. Great reporting, and we'll speak with you soon. Be well.
Thank you, Ari. You be well, too.